Fantastic! Hello there, Master Hellish here and welcome to my Kerbal Space Program Let's Play. Here you see me building already. We're going to do this episode a little bit different than before. I sat down to record this episode and I thought, well, maybe it'll be a little bit of a long one. But by the time I'd finished, it was 2 hours and I thought, I can't give you a 2-hour episode. So what we're going to do this all in fast forward mode. And you're going to have me commentating on the episode that indeed happened. Now, of course, I know what's going to happen here, but I'm going to tell you exactly my train of thought and what's going on throughout this whole process. So here we are. I'm building some sort of lander. I've decided that we need more science. Here you are. I'm looking here and I'm saying, oh, how much science do I need for this? How much science do I need for that? And I'm thinking, God, I need a lot more science than what I have already. So I'm building a little science ship. I'm going to go to a few places and my end goal is to go to the moon and get probably at least 300 science from the moon. But as with everything, I don't just go and do it one-off because, well, I don't really follow tutorials or how-tos on the internet very much. I kind of figure things out for myself. So this is me figuring things out. You're going to follow my thought process and you're going to see how things develop as the things go on. So usually you probably wouldn't see some of these earlier stages in my Let's Plays. This is me just trying to make a basic sort of science vessel. You can see here we've got the main core, and I decided to give the ladders a try because, well, I know how badly they've worked in the past. However, these ones work great. Bob's able to get out, do some scans and stuff, and of course we've done these at the launch pad before, so we don't really get much science from them, but it's a good practice so that when we do land on the moon we know that we can get round it and give it a go. Also, it's quite easy to get back on the ladder, and I'm surprised how good it was to get back into the capsule. So we go on with the next part of the design. So we've tried this out just on the launch pad. I now want to finish off the main part of the design here. Now, I put in a communications device on it, but I don't know why I did that. Kind of just in case thing, really, because it's generally a good idea to have one on. But I figure the next thing I want to do is launch this up in the air, see how it moves and see how it reacts. And what we'll do is we'll land in water, because the water is a bit more forgiving than the ground. So with a few tweaks and a few little bits and bobs, I'm now just trying to decide what parachutes to put on. Now, initially I thought I want 2 on each side here, but it gets in the way of the hatch and we want our pilot to be able to get out. So I start looking at ways of putting them on the top. I didn't like that, so I tried this. And whilst practical and probably would work, I decided it looked rubbish and I didn't like it. It just was a bit weird, a bit wonky and top heavy. So in the end I thought, right, okay, we've got to put something in here. Something to, you know, mount all this stuff on. And in the end I decided on an empty fuel tank. It was the best shape and size for what I wanted, and, well, despite it being empty and pretty pointless, it actually worked out quite well. It also meant I could move the ladder, and the ladder now completely comes up to the pod. 2 parachutes and 4 solar panels, and we're ready to go for another quick test on the launch pad because I've changed it quite a lot, making sure the ladder works, and I think we're ready to build this out into some sort of craft. So here we go, getting ready for our first proper launch with this new vehicle. It's kind of a compact science bullet. Yeah, that's what we're going to call it from now on, a science bullet. Well, I stick it on top of a solid booster with some winglets and away it goes. So I edge my way over towards the water and I realise I start going too fast, so I start to try and bleed off speed by twisting and turning a little bit. Well, we drop the booster, parachutes go out, and everything seems to be pretty much fine. Apart from we're pointing down a little bit too much, but when the parachutes open, that pretty much sorts itself out with a bit of spinning. Quite happy with that. So after this, the next stage would be to do a landing test. So instead of landing on water, we're going to land on land, and I just decided to make sure that I've got all the science from the water. So I just quickly nip Bob out there. Bob, of course, our scientist, and of course our scientist hasn't really got the ability to use SAS in the system, but that's not a problem because in that service bay the actual core of this whole item is actually a probe core. So Bob is just there along for the ride. He's not doing any piloting. It's the probe core which we're controlling that does all the hard work for us. Well, now I decide that we're going to need a bit of actual liquid fuel to get ourselves. You see there, I tried to move the ship up, and I had to get the probe to do it. But yeah, a bit of liquid fuel here, so that we can then do a further burn towards the mountains. So there's the solid booster, and it doesn't take long for that thing to burn out. And when it does, everything went horribly wrong. The heavy end of all the science and all the bits and bobs just meant that I couldn't really get this in the direction I wanted it to go. And despite using the swivel engine, it was quite difficult to get it in position, and you had to use a lot of thrust to keep it going in that way. Well, I decided to cut my losses and head towards the ground for a landing test. After all, that's what we came out here for, and you can see the booster, the upper stage down there, hitting the ground, smashing to pieces. And then I remember, hang on, I don't want to smash to pieces, so we release our chutes, and we've got a landing gear out. Bob comes in for a landing, and it doesn't really go to plan. It fell over, but I figured I can roll it over and Bob can still come out, and we can check to make sure we got our science. I figured when we land on the moon, this vessel would actually be a lot lighter in some ways. It wouldn't actually be lighter, but it acts as if it's lighter because of the low gravity of the moon. So it'll be easier to land this sort of thing on the moon. Alright, I go around and, oh! Bob disappears. So at this point, I've actually had to restart the game because I tried to get on the craft with Bob and he bugged out. Bob disappeared. It said that he died, but he didn't do anything apart from grab the ladder and bug out. So I reloaded the save just before we set off, and this time we go with an extra set of fins, and you can see those set of fins going beautifully. So because of the error in the game and the little bug that we encountered, we actually did do a restart. I don't normally do them, but it was unfair to Bob for him to fall to his doom to the fact of a glitch in the game. So we're going back. If he smashes straight into the side of this mountain, of course we will carry on and we will raise a flag in his memory, but hopefully that will not happen. So we let go of everything there, put our landing legs out, and the lower section again smashes into the hillside. Here I'm trying to just extend 2 of the landing legs because I've noticed that we're on a really big slant, but you can't do that. So I tip the rocket onto its side and actually land it mainly on its side. I did this on purpose so that it didn't just roll down the hill. The last thing you want to do is get the rocket in some sort of rolling situation. And once again, we're out in the mountains, and there's actually a couple of pieces of science here that I hadn't picked up before. Instead of trying to grab the ladder and bugging out like I did before, I decided to jump on the end of the nose cone and go back to base. Well, our next target is to get up into orbit. So we put a bigger booster on, make sure Bob's on board, and we go again with exactly the same vessel. So this one last time got us to the mountains. This time I'm hoping it's going to get us into orbit. But again, this booster is a lot bigger. So hopefully it's going to get us a lot further. You can see we're already at 800 meters per second. We hit about a kilometer a second as we enter about, what was that? It was about, I think it was 36,000 feet, 1,000 meters, sorry, not feet. But we had to use a bit of fuel there to get to that top point, and now we're burning out round. Normally this is the sort of thing that if we was doing a normal episode, I'd probably say, oh, I'll see you in orbit, and lo and behold, next cut, there we are, we'd be in orbit, because it takes a little while to do. I decided now this was a good opportunity, now we're actually in orbit, to get some science, because why not? This is what we're doing today. We're trying to get as much science as possible. And I just wanted to clear up some of these smaller things. So we're EVAing out, and the Bob flying around his ship with his little EVA. I quite like this vessel. It looks quite cool. It's too bad we can't bring it back in and land it. Well, that's really something for future episodes that I want to achieve. So I try and get back in, and I use the ladder to get back in, and oh, it bugs out again, but this time it spins him off in a wild direction, and I was able to use his RCS to get him safely back to his craft. That really worried me. Remember, you're watching this in about 5 times speed, so he really did fly off quite quickly there. A small little burn, and we are getting ready to re-enter. It doesn't take long for a little burn like that to correct us. We ditched the main stage there and we're up. with our top pod. Now at the moment we're carrying all the science experiments with us, but if Bob was to EVA out like he did just then and collect all the science, then there'd be no need to bring the science back with us. We could just leave it and to burn up in the atmosphere. And burn up is exactly what happens. So there is a massive explosion, and upon investigation I notice one of my landing legs exploded. Not a terrible thing to happen. I mean, as long as the capsule or the parachutes don't go, I'm not really that bothered at this stage. And of course the main probe core in the middle that's holding everything together. But things like solar panels and landing legs I'm not that bothered with. Coming down in the dark, I was pleased to see coastline. It gives me a bit of a marker to head towards, and I decided to open the landing gear nonetheless, I wasn't quite sure if we was going to hit the coast, but then when we got a bit closer, yeah, we're going to end up in the water. And we plopped straight in. Well, that was a successful orbit around Kerbal, but I wasn't very happy with the way it went. I wanted to get up there higher and get science from in orbit high above Kerbal. So I strapped 2 of the big rockets on, and once I'd got them sat correctly, I then adjusted their thrust down to 50%. And this resulted in what was the slowest launch ever. Remember, this is 5 times speed. That almost looks like a normal launch there in 5 times speed. That thing launched so slowly. Here you can see that we're still only doing 100 meters per second and we're nearly 3 kilometers up. Incredibly slow. Well, there was a lot of wobble on this, and despite it being a very similar vessel to the last one that just went up, it just didn't really seem to want to go. I had to use quite a lot of fuel to get it into space. A little bit more than what I wanted to, really. So this is pretty much the same thing again. Again, this is the sort of thing I probably could, but you can see I'm just pushing backwards here on the nav ball at the bottom, just to push that apophis out in front of us, give it a boost, and then we swing it out to about 250,000 meters. Once we're out at 250,000 meters, I rotate the vessel throughout 90 degrees to make it easier to get Bob back on board this time, so he can just get straight on the ladder rather than coming at it from beneath. I think that's what caused the problem before. Well, whilst we're up here, I do all the science, I do an EVA report, get all the bits of data from all the different devices, and once I've done that, I just head straight back to my hatch and get back on board. It doesn't take much of a burn to decrease my periapsis into the atmosphere, and I fold in the ladder and we head back in, again hoping that nothing explodes. Watch me decouple the bottom section there, nice little bit, and this time we're coming back in the daylight. I always prefer to do everything in the daylight, it's so much better, and I'd actually forgotten to put any sort of lighting on this vessel, and just as I was landing here now, I'm thinking to myself, ooh, I wish I'd put lighting on this, and at that very moment 2 things explode. Firstly, there was an explosion there, and I think there's another one there as the whole vessel flips around. Bit of SAS, and I managed to get it pointing the right direction again, and we're coming in backwards with only 2 landing legs. Well, if you land at the right angle, those landing legs can take the pressure out of a landing, but I noticed we're coming into water anyway, so it's just a job of deploying the parachutes, letting the vessel settle, and landing in the water. So yeah, as I was saying, I was thinking to myself, oh, I really could do with putting some lights on here before we go to the moon. However, I completely forget this, and for the rest of the whole episode, I never put any lights on it. Right, it's now time to really turn this into a proper moon lander. Up until now, we've been quite cautious. Now we're putting loads of fuel on, and we're getting this heavy mainsail on the bottom. We're going to put 4 of those big fat boosters on the side, and little tiny wings. These little tiny wings will ensure that the boosters peel away from our craft and don't damage them as they separate. Then looking at this top section, I realise that this really is not the best way for us to go, and I need something that needs to be a little bit redesigned. I get rid of the fuel tank and I start thinking to myself of different ways I can be doing this. I put some solar panels on the top there thinking, I might keep them there, I might not. And I start looking at a bigger, fatter kind of lander, something with some actual fuel that can bring us home. So I get the science part and I think to myself, right, okay, if we put this science bit in the middle here, some fuel on the side, legs and an engine, that will actually get us probably back from the moon. Then I look at this and I think, oh, that's okay, but we probably need more fuel in the upper stage. So I get rid of the upper stage completely and I put this massive fuel tank there. Quick adjustments to make sure everything's in line. There we go. Looking good. I set those fins. There we go. And landing clamps. Quick check to see how things are ordered on the staging. Yeah, seems alright to me. Let's get this thing on the launch pad. Now, I decide, oh, hang on a minute, I need to put my science on. I was just about to leave for the launch pad then, but then I realised, there we go. I call it the Mark II, as it's a significantly different top than the last bits, and we go. A much faster and cleaner launch this time, and I'm feeling good about this trip to the moon. These solid boosters have given me so much thrust that I turn off the mainsail engine for a short amount of time, conserving fuel whilst not going too fast. They separate and the whole vessel falls to pieces. Again, this is the kind of thing that I would probably cut out if it was in the main game, but, you know, you're seeing everything today. So I think to myself, oh dear, we've got to bring Bob back. What happened there? Then I realised that I had my staging wrong. I had extra bits in. So I ditched that fuel canister, which is a high likelihood of exploding, as it does as it hit the ground. And something hit me. I don't know what it was. But something fell out the sky, a piece of debris, and it blew off part of my spaceship. But Bob landed safely, so I was able to change the staging and try again. So here we go. Now we're going on the second attempt to the moon. This is the last trip of the episode, and it surely, hopefully, is going to be the most scientific. Up until now, really, we've been testing the theories of what's on this ship and how it's responding, especially science in space. We want to be able to access all the different science bits. Although I haven't tested this configuration, it works quite well. Well, I managed to get the lump up into space. That's not too bad at all. And we've got a nice bit of fuel left. Over half the tank is still full of the main fuel. Giving it a big push here and trying to stay just behind it. Staying just behind this point seems to be a good thing to do. I'm not sure about that though. We push it out, we're into orbit, we get the moon at 3 o'clock and we put a manoeuvre node in, do a bit of tweaking, and there we go. We've got an encounter with the moon. Now I decided to burn a little bit early here because we haven't got much fuel left in the main stage, and the next stage here, this little tank, well, big tank, the single tank, is not as powerful as the back end piece, so yeah, I decided to give myself some extra time. At this point I'm looking at Minmus and thinking, could I slingshot off the moon and go to Minmus? And then I realised that I need to do one thing at once and I should probably concentrate on what I'm doing. And as I'm doing so, I noticed that instead of going to the moon, we're actually going to crash into it. So I do some adjustments here. I adjust our plane by burning to our counter normal, and then I burn out the periaps, no, not the periaps, the prograde, and we are now next to the moon. A retrograde burn brings us into a capture, and I start looking now where I want to land. I decided it didn't matter too much where I was going to land, and I just thought, right, anywhere on the light side will do for today. And that's exactly what's happening. We're coming in right quick to the moon, a bit of time warping so I don't have to wait for this vessel to sweep around, and we're starting to burn. We were travelling at nearly 600 meters per second. We've got lots of fuel left in this tank, but I decide that it's time to ditch it because we don't want to land on it. If we land on it, the whole thing could topple over. That could cause us damage. So we fire that off, and our smaller engine is at full power almost as we come towards the ground, and not a bad landing, a little bit of a bounce. Well, needless to say, I'm quite happy about this. So we do our crew reports, our EVA reports, we take a surface sample, we do atmosphere analysis and realise we can't because there is no atmosphere, and we take the science from everywhere else and go to the materials bay. And I realise it's actually a little bit difficult to get into the materials bay. I have to keep jumping at it with the RCS and trying to open the doors, take the science data, and then reset the device because I want to use it again. Because it ends up being quite tricky. Although in the end I manage it, but Bob actually then gets back in, and I thought, well, what if I fly to the right a little bit, because I'm counting as in that crater, and I'm right on the edge of the crater. So if I go this way a bit and over this lip and just out of this crater, I should count as not being in the crater. And if I'm not in the crater, then that's a different biome. And if it's a different biome, then I can get even more science. Remember, my target here was to achieve 300 science, and that's what I really, really, really want. Okay, using the probe's retrograde marker, I land the craft a little bit less bumpier this time, a little bit smoother than the time before. So of course we do the crew reports and EVA reports. We pop off and do our science bits and bobs through the mystery goo, pressure data and temperature. Then I just pop over here and Bob actually gets stuck. There's nothing I can do. I can't make him move, I can't get him out there, the controls are just not responding, he won't use his RCS, and I don't know what to do. In the end, I open the service bay there and it pushes him off and comes back to life. I don't know what I'd have done if I hadn't been able to open the service bay and knock him out at that point. Oh well, we board with all our experiments and I just do some checking to make sure they're in there, and they all are. Now, some more checking to make sure I'm going back route the right way around, and I decide which way I need to be pointing, and off I go. So it's at this stage that probably I should have left some sort of part of the vehicle behind. It makes the whole thing lighter, but I know I've got loads of fuel here. We've got over 200 units of liquid fuel, so we put ourselves out into an orbit of the moon and get ready to burn backwards. If you burn backwards from the inside of the moon, you leave the moon behind and you can actually put yourself in a highly elliptical orbit of Kerbin. You see, I'm not burning away from Kerbin and you end up in an elliptical orbit of Kerbin. It's a bit weird the way it happened, but that's just the way it is. I'm unable to refocus my view on the lander, so what I do is I just go back to the Space Center and I use the facilities there to get back in. So here I'm trying to get myself back to Kerbin, but I've got no SAS. My solar panels are in shade and the whole craft is pointing away from the sun. So again I have a brilliant idea and I get Bob out and I use his RCS to push and nudge the craft in a rotation, which then points in towards the sun and I get some power back. Could have been another disaster there, but Bob used his head and got me out of this sticky situation. So we now bring our periapsis down into just about the atmosphere, down to 50 kilometers up, and we're going to use the rest of our fuel to just bring in our apoapsis down to a nice landing. Now at this point I'm thinking I've got about 20 units of fuel, I probably ought to stop, and I actually leave myself with 14 units, which is more than enough to just degrade my orbit and get myself back on the sunny side of the planet. I realise I'm pretty much there going in anyway, so I prepare myself to ditch the stage. There it goes. The stage is now floating away towards the planet and will probably burn up in the atmosphere or delete itself when it gets 20 kilometers away from me. Now this smaller, lighter capsule should do better, and I just realise at this point how much my parachutes are sticking out from my spaceship. They weren't before, but they are in this one. A little bit of spinning and a lot of heat, but the parachutes survive and so does everything else. And the craft comes quite gently back to the planet. Well, Bob has had his second trip to the moon, and this time he's brought a load of science back with him. And as you can see here, we ended up with 454.1 science for that fantastic trip. So that really achieved what I wanted to get this episode. Add that 451 to the bits when I went to the water, the launch pads and the mountains, along with what we had previously, and we're now up to 600 science. We can buy a lot of cool things ready for next episode, and we hardly spent any money as well. We've still got 1.49 million in the bank. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the episode, and it was a bit of a different one. Let me know what you thought of that in the comments, and maybe if you want to see some more fuller videos like this in the future. Thanks for watching, take care, and goodbye.